Welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing well. This video is going to cover some of the questions you guys had regarding the 2017 LX570 that we recently sold. I'll go through some of the things I did complete. If you were following along with the last few videos of the LX570, I was doing a slight suspension lift with the AHC hydraulic suspension intact, along with larger tires and wheels, wider offset, and some trimming of the body panels in the front to get everything to work correctly, while still trying to keep the factory suspension in place intact and keep AHC fully functional. In one of the previous videos, I showed you all of the different components that were purchased and going on the truck. Short list of those was the panhard bracket relocation kit to get the suspension geometry for the rear back in check, get the axle centered where it should be, along with the panhard bar at the right angle. There was also the rear coil spring packers, the spacers. There was the rear AHC relocation brackets that allowed the rear AHC shocks to operate within the factory specs and not bottom out at full extension, and also to lower the pressures in the rear AHC shocks back to where the factory designed them to be. Then for the front, there was the ARB Old Man Emu upper control arms that would slightly adjust where your caster and camber were, give you a little bit of room for adjustment, and still accommodate for the AHC sensor with the bracket built into the ARB upper control arms. Then there was the front factory 10mm spacers, OEM Toyota part, that sat on top of the coil and spring assembly and get you a little bit more lift without having to modify anything up front. Now keep in mind, this is my third 200 series. Lifted and slightly modified the last two as well, so learned some lessons along the way that I want to share with you guys so that you don't run into the same problems as you modify your 200 series, whether it's an LX570 or a Land Cruiser. With the rear suspension, it's pretty straightforward. You can lift at about 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch with just the sensors, the left and right height sensors. Adjust those, get the amount of lift you want, and you really don't have to change a whole lot. You can leave everything alone if you're only looking for about 3/4 of an inch or lift, maybe even a little bit more than that. More than that gets you to where the rear suspension starts getting really tight, and then the panhard bar is out of its normal geometry. So in my case, what I did was use the 50mm spring spacers in the back, the E&E off-road rear AHC spacers for the bottom of the AHC shocks and the rear to raise them up. And then also the panhard bar relocation kit from Dr. KDSS, which is a fantastic assembly, really well built. I highly recommend them. If you're lifting any sort of Toyota truck, they've got those panhard bar relocation brackets for all sorts of different platforms. Then for the front, I had the ARB upper control arms and the factory 10mm spacers that were going to go on. What I did get done was the rear. I got all of the rear components done. I have video footage of all of that. I will do my best to get that edited, put together, and uploaded for you guys so you see what that process looks like. For the rear, I was really setting everything up to get about 3 inches of lift out of it, maybe eventually go to a larger tire. But if I was to stick with those 34.5 inch tires that I put on the truck, what I would do is go with a 30mm coil spacer. That way I've got the rear end just a little bit lower. With the 50mm spacers, I lost a little bit of shock absorption because I added too much spring to the back, and the AHC shock system was not able to function totally as it's designed to. So I had a little bit of bounce in the rear, not enough shock absorption, too much spring assistance. So if you are going to go with, say, 2 inch, 1.5 inch lift, maybe 2 1/4 inches of lift, go with a 30mm spacer. You'll be much happier there. The E&E off-road shock spacers were a very nice set and well put together, machined really well. I highly recommend them for anybody wanting to lift your LX570. And then of course the Dr. KDSS panhard bar bracket to get that panhard bar back into an appropriate angle. It's got 2 mounting spots for different amounts of lift. Also very good bit of kit. What I did was get the 50mm spacers on there, the lower brackets for the AHC shocks, the panhard bar bracket relocation kit. After getting those components on, I got the rear set up to where I wanted to, and it looked perfect. It drives very well. The panhard bar relocation gets the rear to where if you hit a bump in the highway, if you've ever had a lifted truck with a rear solid axle, you hit a bump and the rear kind of does this thing where it dips and it sways to the side. It feels a little uneasy. That's a lot of times because your panhard bar is not within the right angle that it was designed to be. And in those cases, you either weld on a bracket or you use a relocation kit like the one from Dr. KDSS to relocate your panhard bar, get the angle closer to where it's level with the ground again, and then it starts feeling a lot more like a factory vehicle in the back. The front, I did not get to put the front control arms on, the ARB upper control arms or the spacers for the shocks. I did get the AHC sensors maxed out to where they were at their highest setting in the front, and it drove okay. What I can tell you is that initially what I ran into is the alignment. I just couldn't get it right. I went back to a very reputable local alignment shop, and multiple times they tried to align it. It would be fine for a little while, and then what I noticed immediately is that there was a lot of sway when you would hit the gas, and the front would unload a little bit. So if you're hitting the gas or if you're going uphill and the front suspension unloads a little bit, you've got more of your weight on the rear, front of the car lifts up just a little bit. It was enough of a change to where it made the front really uneasy. It was not predictable. It wasn't a good, comfortable feeling, especially when you're on the highway. So what I ended up doing to get a little bit better of a feel, at least temporarily, was raise the rear up a little bit from where I originally had it. I had the truck where it was almost level, like when you put a leveling kit on a truck or an SUV, and it looked great that way, but what it did is get that front caster angle just far off enough at the edge of the adjustability for the factory upper control arms to where it felt really uneasy at higher speeds. And once I raise the front or the back up just a little bit, you get that little bit of a stink bug look where the back is a little higher than the front is. A lot of times you'll have that from the factory on most SUVs and trucks. And it's done for a couple of reasons. One is for load absorption, and the other one is for the steering angle. Once you raise the back up just a little bit, it gets your steering angle, your caster, just a little bit healthier on the front end. And once I did that, it drove actually really good, much better than I thought it would, very surprisingly. Ideally though, if you want to do it correctly and you're at 2 inches of lift or maybe a little bit more, get those front upper 10mm spacers on, and also get those front upper control arms replaced with ARB or a different brand. So to summarize, here's a short version, the cheat notes. If you want 2.5 inches more or more of lift, get those 50mm rear coil spacers, get the front set up with a good upper control arm that gives you more adjustability and better control over caster angle, get the 10mm spacers for the front struts and shocks, and the panhard bar relocation along with the lower AHC shock mounts from E&E Off-Road. That'll give you a fantastic setup that is predictable, good road manners, and tons of lift, about as much lift as you can get on an LX570 without starting to replace a lot of different suspension components. Now, what if you just want a slight lift? If you just want maybe 1 inch of lift, 1.25 inch, or even less than that, you don't need to do a lot of those things. If you just want a slight lift, get a 10mm spacer for the front strut assemblies, get maybe a 10mm spacer for your rear coils, maybe a 25mm for your rear coils, depending on how much lift you want. And if you get up to about 1.25 inch of lift, that panhard bracket, panhard relocation bracket from Dr. KDSS is also really helpful. You don't want to use the max position that I use, but it has another spot right below that you'll want to use at about 1.25 inch of lift, and it'll get your suspension geometry in a very good place where it's comfortable You got that factory driving feel, and it's very predictable on the road. The other thing to keep in mind, if your LX570 has more than about 75 or 80,000 miles, do yourself a favor, bleed the AHC fluid, the hydraulic fluid. I have another video on the channel that, if you want to take a look, describes the entire process to replace all 4 of the HC accumulators that are critical part of the suspension, along with the bleeding procedure. Follow that along if your truck has over 100,000 miles and you want to refresh the suspension system with some new globes. Last thing on the suspension lift and big tires. If you are on an 2008 to 2015 LX570 or Land Cruiser, and you're going with bigger wheels and tires, or usually bigger tires, not necessarily wheels, they're going to be a lot more heavy. You got a lot more weight that's rotating. Your rotating mass is quite a bit more on all 4 corners. Make sure you spend the time and either refresh to new OEM brakes, or more ideally, install some uprated brakes. My favorite are the Power Stop Z36 brakes for the Land Cruiser and LX570 platform. I've had them on 2 of my previous LXs. I had them purchased and sitting on the shelf right over there for this last LX that we just sold. That was going to go on, and I highly recommend them. You can go with other brands. There's a lot of good brands out there, but with bigger wheels and tires, you got a lot more rotating mass. Make sure you're upgrading your brakes to accommodate for that. The last thing you want is to be going down a hill or a bunch of red lights, and your heat-soaked brakes don't function as quickly as you think they are, and you end up getting into an accident. And coincidentally, I do have another video on the channel when I installed the Z36 upgraded brakes on our old 2009 LX570. Check that out if you're looking to do brakes on yours. It might be helpful for you to get a visual. In the meantime, hope everybody enjoyed this video and it was helpful. If you've got any questions, put them down in the comments below. I'm happy to help answer any question you guys might have. If there's enough questions, maybe I'll do a live next weekend. I'll hop on and run through a bunch of questions on the 200 series if you guys have any. And maybe help share some knowledge, and maybe I'll learn some from you guys too. Happy 2025 to everyone. Hope it's off to a great start. I'll see you next time. Love y'all. Bye-bye.